This story was submitted by Marsupial. I met Oliver on my first day of college. He was a bit taller than me with short blonde hair and sky blue eyes. He just sat down by my side one day and began making conversation. He was a real chatterbox, but with him, things never felt awkward or imposing. This guy had a seemingly infinite repertoire of wacky stories from his high school years. Hearing them was always a blast, and I found it easy to drift away into his world of fortuitous encounters and midnight escapades. The way he told them almost felt like an exposition, but with him it was always like that, regardless of the topic at hand. It wasn't uncommon for him to be the one leading the conversation, and he always seemed to feign interest when people went on about their routine, personal tastes, and private stuff. He also never took any notes during class, despite always bringing his notebook and a pen. Instead, he would spend every second making origami, and I'm not just talking about some average origami, but things like horses, rams, and mythological creatures like dragons and pegasi. All of them had breathtaking designs, and even though some of them took him over 3 hours to finish, he didn't seem to grow attached to them, and usually he'd just leave them on the table for someone else to find. Despite not having that many classes in common, after only a month or two, Oliver and I ended up becoming best bros. For a time, I was really worried he would flunk out of everything due to his carefree attitude. I mean, come on. This guy hadn't even bought 2/3 of the text material, and wasn't working despite being broke beyond any shadow of a doubt, but somehow he always managed to scrape by. I jokingly asked him if he bribed or had some kind of special deal with the teachers. He told me it was nothing of the sort, and proceeded to explain that he finds it easier to retain memories of things he heard when his hands were busy with origami. I told him he was a major bullshitter, and he laughed and agreed. I spent those years living alone in a small flat a few blocks away from campus. There's no such thing as college dorms in my country. And after a hellish week of nonstop studying, I received a call from Oliver, asking me to let him crash for the weekend. He arrived Saturday late at night, and this was the first time he'd come to my apartment. He'd brought his usual notebook with him, saying that he needed somewhere to write down in case he had a dream that night, as he had a dream most every night, and was very diligent in keeping track of them. We just went to sleep, and woke up late the next day. During the day we had a fun time watching some terrible movies and playing Jazz Jack Rabbit 2, and other old-ass games on an emulator. That night, we put on our nice clothes to ready ourselves for our first night clubbing. The prospect of getting to know a cute girl was both terrifying and exhilarating after so much time without going out. On the way to the club, he was telling me something about showing me the flexibility of a true social chameleon. I called him out saying he was all talk, because at the end of the day, if his game was so spot on, why didn't he have a girlfriend by now? We ended up arriving at a place that was closer to being a bar than a proper club, and stayed there till around 6 or 7 a.m. And despite getting trashed, I realized he hadn't been bluffing. This fucker was jumping from one group of people to another, and by the end of the night he had convinced the remaining bunch to gather as one circle of people. Everyone was chatting and getting along as if they knew each other for months, and he took any chance he had to rub in his success by winking at me. After some time he told me he wasn't feeling that well, and he needed a bit of air. I thought it was odd, because mere seconds ago he seemed lively, but that's no reason to argue. I told him he could wait outside for just a minute while I said goodbye to my new acquaintances, and he nodded promptly and headed to the door. By the time I got out of the building, it was already too late. I turned right expecting to find Oliver resting against the wall, but instead found him kneeling on the ground on top of some guy with a jacket, breathing heavily, with his hands covered in blood. I sobered up immediately when I saw the face of the other dude. Oh my god, his fucking face. Everything was red and swollen. It actually looked like a topping of a cheesecake. Both his cheekbones sank in, most surely fractured. I was in complete disbelief, and spouted something idiotic like, "What the actual fuck?" But Oliver didn't seem to hear me, and just leaned his body and threw his head backwards as if he was looking at the sky. Then, in a swift and single motion, he put his hands around the guy's neck and brought his mouth really close to what was left of his face, and proceeded to let out this horrifying and inhumane low-pitched scream. I rushed forward and put my hand on Oliver's shoulders, and began to try to break his grip while shouting for him to stop, but by the time I managed to push him out of the way, he had already left some nasty-looking scarring on the guy's neck. Oliver just collapsed and made a complete 180. Now he was curled up, grabbing my clothes, crying and shaking uncontrollably. He muttered something along the lines of, "It was him, even after all these years." I had the hospital's number saved in my phone, so I gave them a call for an ambulance. Some of the clientele from the bar, 3 of the guys we had been talking to, propelled out onto the sidewalk, probably alarmed by what they caught of the screams over the sound of the music, and laid witness to what was happening. Oliver began to calm down, and despite his shock, managed to tell us that this guy had abused him as a child, and had gotten free just recently. He had been following him, and the second they crossed paths, the guy started taunting him, telling him that time could never rob him of the memories they shared together, and more sick stuff like that. We debated on phoning the cops, but the guys told us not to worry, that they'd explained to the paramedics that he just threatened a customer and that he'd simply fought back. They also told us that they would back us up in case the dude tried to press charges for assault. Of course they'd say those nice things. There was no way they could have imagined the crazed look in my friend's eyes just moments ago. I helped him up, and we began walking towards my apartment, thanking the guys for being such magnificent bastards. By the time we got home, I was still unable to shake the uneasiness. I was conflicted between carrying on my duties as a friend, aka comforting him, or calling his family to pick him up. Yes, even though it feels awful to say, I wasn't looking forward to sharing a room with him. Not until I was sure he was back to his old self. "Say, pal, you seem quite shocked by all that happened. You sure you don't want to sleep in your own bed? I can drive you." And he calmly replied, "I came so close to disappointing you," whilst washing away the blood in the sink. I thought I was witnessing the brewing of a mental breakdown, but still asked him what he meant by that. At this point he turned off the water and turned around to face me. He was strangely relaxed and was now sporting his trademark smile. "Oh, you see, the night was so unremarkable. I just needed to make something happen." And while saying this, his smile kept stretching until it formed a sinister grin that did not suit his face at all. "You seem to be the one that loves my stories the most. I thought it would be a shame not to gift you with one of your own." I was dumbfounded, and amazed at the naturality with which these words were leaving his mouth. "Are you fucking mental?" I shouted at him. "You could have killed him!" And then it hit me. My heart sunk, and I took a step backwards. That story about the guy being a child molester, it had all been a lie. An act. Complete and utter bullshit. Just a way to manipulate the guys into not calling the police, and an excuse to pick a random-ass dude walking down the street and leave him half dead. It was just too sinister, too devoid of emotion. I was grinding my teeth out of rage and fear at this realization. I told him to leave, that he wasn't welcome in my flat any longer. He raised his shoulders, and before crossing the doorway, told me that this was one-of-a-kind type of incident, and that he understands that there was a chance we would never hang out again. He also told me that he would be patient, as he understood it would take some time. He wasn't the clingy type, and he never used social media, so when I stopped talking with him, we started seeing each other a lot less often. The rest of the year went without incidents, and by the end of it, he'd sometimes wave at me, and I'd reply with a cold, bitter smile, just for old time's sake. We never talked. The glance I had at what lay behind his charming persona was too disturbing for me to forgive or forget. I still have Oliver's notebook, though. At first I thought he forgot it in my apartment after the whole situation went down, but he never asked me to give it back, so I guess he just intended for me to have it. I've read only parts of it, and they were pretty weird and cryptic, like all dreams, I guess. Sometime after, during a summer break, he called me from the airport. I knew this was the last time I would probably hear of him, so I reluctantly picked up, expecting a fake-ass apology of some kind. But he just wanted to let me know that he was going to study abroad in Europe. A silence followed, and what he said before hanging up will stick with me forever. Much like paper, you can shape people into your heart's desire. Goodbye, my beautiful, beautiful crane. I know nothing of Oliver's current whereabouts, but the guy he attacked did survive. He'd never stopped breathing. He was just knocked out cold. Apparently he got sucker punched and never even saw who did it. This story was submitted by Chris. I live in the Midwestern United States near the intersection of two rural highways. The area around me built up fairly quickly during the real estate bubble, but development came to a screeching halt with the recession and is yet to pick back up. Because of this, you can drive for about 10 minutes down the road and go from shopping malls and big-name stores to cornfield as far as the eyes can see. My buddies Keith and Mark were bored of our usual night's routine of beer and hookah, and we decided to do something a little more adventurous. We piled in Keith's truck and started driving around. Keith's truck is small, barely big enough for the three of us, with a pathetic excuse of a seat in the back of the cab behind the front passenger. I drew the short end of the straw that night and rode in back. My knees tucked into my chest and my head hitting the rear window with every turn, Mark suggested that we go down the highway away from town. We had all lived in the area for 15 years at this point, but had never really gone far out that way. It was an exciting prospect to us, as lame as it may sound from an outside perspective. Now, when I say the city development stopped abruptly, I mean it stopped dead. As soon as you pass my high school, there aren't any streetlights. You're just swallowed by darkness. And corn. We drove in confidence, laughing and joking, blasting death metal, and telling scary stories to rile each other up. After about 40 minutes, the cornfields ended, and the area became a prairie and forest. The only light came from the stars in our headlights. Sometime after this, we came upon a car parked on the shoulder of the road, with the engine still running. There was a woman in her late teens, early 20s, standing a few feet away with her back to the road. She turned and looked as we pulled up. Mark rolled down his window and asked if she was okay, and she told us everything was fine and that she was just taking pictures of the deer. I looked out and saw she had a nice professional-looking digital camera on a tripod. And there was in fact dozens of deer grazing in the field. It was a really cool sight. We said goodbye and went on our way thinking nothing of it. Another half hour or so passes, and there's still nothing but trees and steps. We were getting bored and ready to just turn around, when suddenly Keith yells and slams on the brakes. A fawn had run out of the tree line and almost head first into the truck. Keith was shaken, and decided that that was the end of our little excursion. The ride home went without incident, until we passed back by the clearing where we met the girl. Her car was no longer there, but I saw a strange blue light as we passed. I asked Keith to stop. We got out of the truck and saw the light was coming from her camera. It was still on, sitting on the tripod pointed towards the field. We thought it was strange that she would just leave without this clearly expensive camera and tripod. Thumbing through some of the recent pictures showed just what you'd expect, foraging deer with creepy eye glow. Being three 20-year-old tough but upstanding guys, we decided to scope out the field and see if she was still nearby. There was a tall patch of grass behind the tree line, unable to be seen by the road. Her car was parked in it, hidden, and the doors were unlocked. Something was clearly wrong. In the distance before the woods started up again, we could see a farmhouse. We mustered up all of the courage we could and crept towards it. The grass was almost shoulder height and difficult to traverse through. It was rigid and cut at our clothes and skin. As we got near the house, we saw a chain-linked fence topped with barbed wire enclosing the property. There were also several buildings on the property. To the right of the house was a large metal shed with what looked like a garage door. We were all in stunned, terrified silence, but came to the same conclusion. The owner of this house must have grabbed her, hid her car, and took her into that shed to do God knows what. We didn't have time to plan out our next move, as the outside light suddenly flicked on, and a man stormed out holding something long and metallic looking. It was too dark and happened too fast to get a clear view of exactly what it was he was holding. Our fight or flight responses switched in immediately, and all three of us chose flight. How did he know we were out there? Keith later suggested that he probably had cameras or motion sensors on the property. We turned and sprinted as fast as we could away from the fence and back to the truck. I dove into the cab and landed halfway on the center console and half on Mark's lap. We flew out of there at over 100 miles per hour until we saw streetlights again, and knew we made it back to the safety of our town. We pulled into the parking lot of the high school and just sat in the bed of the truck to discuss what just happened. We hastily convinced ourselves that the girl probably lived in that house or went into the woods after the deer, and that we were just being paranoid over nothing. The brain desperately tries to rationalize when it encounters something so terrifyingly out of its norm. Perhaps we thought if we didn't call the police or talk about it, it wasn't real. I watched the news and looked online for weeks, searching for missing persons reports matching her description. I never found any, so we went on with our lives and never told a soul about what we saw. Why was her car hidden? Why was her camera left unattended? Where the hell did she go? Was that farmer just wary of intruders? Or was he skinning her alive in that garage? If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you look in the description for information on how to submit your stories. Before I get into my thoughts on the stories, I would like to let you know that I have a collaboration video up on Unit Number 522's channel. I'll have a link in the description if you're looking for something to watch. Now for the first story. It's really unfortunate that you guys didn't notify the authorities, but in the same sense I can kinda see why they tried to cover it up. He was actually able to come up with a believable story to get people to help cover his back. So it sounds like he may have done it before and found a pretty good way to get people to not notify the authorities. I think it was a very wise decision to kick him out of your apartment, as well as your life. And thankfully he left the country so you don't have to see him. But now the people in Europe might want to worry. But in the same sense, they're not going to take any shit. He'll end up in a hostel and in some red room somewhere. Now for the second story. I'm really wondering what happened to that girl. If she just lived there, or if, like you said, she got abducted. It's a little strange that you would see a lady on the side of the road at night with her vehicle if she lived right there. You would think she would just walk. But then again, it wasn't night, and she might not have wanted to get hit by any oncoming traffic, so brought the vehicle out there to keep people away. But even if that was the case, she wouldn't have left her camera. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. We didn't have time to plan our next move as the outside light suddenly flicked on and a man stormed out holding something long and metallic looking.